As many? Chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
I rise on behalf of the people of the constituency to make my contribution to the debate that is before this House. Speaker, there are three issues, of course, before the House, and they concern the Excise Amendment Bill, the Tariff Amendment Bill, and the contribution by the Right Honourable Member for Centreville on the mid-year budget. A large part of the contribution that I shall make will concern the value-added tax component of the mid-year budget contribution. Now, I'll start by saying this, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy. I am quite surprised. I was quite surprised and somewhat concerned by the public reaction to my last statements in this House. And the reason that I was surprised and concerned is that that reaction, to my mind, speaks volumes for the concerns about the state of our democracy. You see, there is still such a thing as the fundamental right of freedom of expression. And that is a pivotal pillar of our democracy. And when I stand in this place, I don't come to this place to make jokes. I honestly don't come to make enemies, but I don't come to make friends. I come to do the duty of the people, as I understand it. And for the comments that I made to give space to speculation as to how those comments would be received by my party, suggests to me that we really have a lot of maturing to do as a democracy. If the members of Parliament elected to this hallowed place cannot speak, then no one in this country can speak. It's as simple as that. And so I say, as I always say, that I come here to speak with the voice of my constituents. I don't come here to speak with my own voice. And I come here to lay before this House the contribution that I can make to advance the debates before this House in the best way that I can see fit to do it. The reaction also led me to another area, Mr. Speaker. And I've had to spend some time thinking about the definition of corruption because it colors what I do in this House. You know, we have the obvious definition: if you go take a bribe, you're corrupt. I think it goes far beyond that. You know, I'm reminded of Joshua coming out of the wilderness, crossing the Jordan. And as he was going over, he said to the people, he says, you know, you see these big rocks in the middle of this river that God just opened? Pick up these rocks, bring them across, stack them up, because there will come a time when people forget that we were once in the wilderness. But they will not forget these rocks. And they'll ask, what are these rocks for? And we will say they are a memorial to remind us where we came from. And so when I thought on the issue of corruption, I want to state it publicly in this House, because I want it to be a memorial as to the standards I set for myself in this House. And then I'll get into my comments on VAT and the rest of it. I think if you sit in this House and you speak or fail to speak because you want to attract or not lose a personal benefit, you're corrupt. That's as simple as it is to me. Whether that is a position, whether that's a title, whether that's an emolument, whether that's a chauffeured car, whether that's anything, you are in here to do the business of the people. And when you get to the point that you cannot continue to do the business of the people because you're thinking about the impact of what you're saying on yourself, then you lost sight of your duty in this House and you started to think about yourself. And to me, that is corrupt. And I am persuaded that I have to say that because anyone could fall into that pattern, and I don't want to fall into that pattern. Speaker, let me say at the outset, I support the Excise Amendment Bill. I support the Tariff Amendment Bill. I oppose, will always oppose, and will vote against the Value-Added Tax Bill when it comes to this House. And I will say why. I'm reminded, Mr. Speaker, of the words of Sir Lyndon. There's a really great book, Pindling, The Life and Times of the First Prime Minister of the Bahamas, by Michael Creighton. There are a number of books, but this one I refer to because I think it's the most balanced of the various books. It presents him not as a god or as a villain, but it presents both sides. And in this book, there's a reference in 1965 to the presentation that Sir Lyndon made before the UN Decolonization Committee, when he was trying to get the United Nations itself involved in the fight of the people of the Bahamas for majority rule. And I know this is old history, and history is quite boring sometimes, but this is important. Because at that time in our history, the majority of people in this country had no control of their political, their economic, their social destinies. And the British Empire did not assist with that. They sided with those who were abusing their position of their so-called democratic positions. And when Sir Lyndon went before the Decolonization Committee, he said many things. And one of the things, he referred to many things that were wrong with the country. He referred to only 6% of the people at the time had a secondary education, no social services, no housing, no hospital facility, no sewerage system. And these will become important as I progress in my discussion. But he touched on one thing that was, in the opinion of the PLP at that time, the crux of the basis upon which that oligarchy, that very small group of persons, that merchant class, was able to dominate and subjugate the majority of the people. And one of the things he spoke to most importantly was the absence of direct taxation. And this is reported in this book. His basic premise, and I'm going to read it, but the basic premise was this. When you're financing the country on the back of the poor, the working class, and the middle class, you are subjugating them. You are creating a system in which they will never be able to rise because they alone are paying the taxes. You're also guaranteeing the merchant class that they will continue to exercise all powers because they will continue to have the economic power. Through that, they will continue to manipulate the political power. And in the absence of equitable taxation, those who are the workers, the poor, the middle class, will never have the means to advance themselves. And so this is a summary of what was said. This is a summary. The only people who benefited from the lack of an income tax were the minority, who made enough income to be taxed. The ordinary people suffered cruelly. Government revenue came very largely from import duties in an economy that imported nearly everything. This contributed to an extremely high cost of living, which pressed hardest upon the ordinary consumer. It was the ordinary people, in fact, who through indirect taxation provided the bulk of government revenue. None of this would ever be changed without majority rule. That was a very important statement of what the PLP stood for. And so we went into independence. And when we went into independence, we made a compromise. And the compromise was that we would not engage into direct taxation. We would keep the indirect taxation. And what that means, direct is where what you earn, I come right there as the government and take a cut. Indirect is I build it into everything you buy, into your food, into your drink, into your anything you consume, and now anything you use. And the point was, at independence, we said to ourselves, you know, we don't want to run away people. We'll keep the indirect taxation system. We know it's inequitable. We know it's wrong. But we will keep it for a time because we do not want to run away the investors. That speech was in 1965. Independence was in 1973. 41 years later, we're still having this debate. There's another publication I want to refer to before I give my comments. It's an interesting publication. It's published by the Progressive Liberal Party, produced by the Council Limited, July 1977. And it's entitled The First 10 Years, A Decade of Progress. And what is so interesting about it, Mr. Speaker, is that it lays out what the PLP saw as progress. And it was diametrically opposed to what the UBP had done before. It was a program to uplift our people. It was a program to strengthen the most marginal. And so we see reference being made in that work, and I won't read the whole thing, of course, to ZNS being started, to the dollar value being maintained, to national insurance, to the healthcare system, to schools, to all these things that became the pillars of the PLP, and really the pillars of the modern Bahamian economy. It showed us at our finest. It showed what we could do as a government to advance the interests of our country. Not what we could claim ownership of and claim responsibility for through someone else's investments in this country, but what as a government we could do to advance the interests of our country. You know, we have, and this is a little tangent, but we have gotten to the point where we see FDI, foreign direct investment, as being a benchmark, a star, a tick for what the government has done. What the government is here to do is to create those institutions, those things that get us to move forward, not to just take responsibility for other people's investments. And so it brings me to the value-added tax. I'm mindful of what the Right Honourable Member for Centerville, the Prime Minister, said about that in this House, where he said that his determination on that is not settled. I take some encouragement from that comment. But this is the point I wish to make. I am shocked, and I think history will be shocked in retrospect, that the VAT is being proposed by the Progressive Liberal Party and not by the FNM. We are the party of the people. And in fact, if you look at it historically, it is an FNM proposal. If you look at the contributions that have been made in this House and are being made in this House, their so-called opposition to it is lukewarm at best, because they do not really oppose it. If you look at the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce's comments on it, it's only about implementation. It's not about whether it should happen or not, just when. How long do we delay it? What regulations do we put in place? How do we manage it when it comes? Because they do not mind. You see, when you go into other countries, you go into the U.S., you see a Democratic Party and you see a Republican Party. You understand the Democratic Party is a party of the average Joe, and the Republican Party is the party of big business. And you know that you need to have the ebb and flow in politics, because if you leave the Democrats in there too long, they'll run the whole state into a socialist state, as would we probably, as PLPs. And if you leave the Republicans in there too long, they will run a capitalist country, trickle-down economics, all the poor people are the women fancy of the rich. And so you have the whole process. But you never get confused about what policies they're going to bring, Democrats and Republicans, because their policies are based on their ideologies. And their ideology is based on the group that happens to be their constituents. And that's why I say I'm shocked that this is a PLP proposal. Let's talk about what VAT is. VAT simply follows from the fact, and let me preface this because I don't want a bunch of interruptions. These are my opinions. VAT follows from the fact that really there are only two types of taxes, and the people of the country need to understand this. You can tax income, or you can tax consumption. Essentially, you can tax wealth, or you could tax what you eat, what you drink, and what you use. One or the other. And they affect the economy very differently. They affect people very differently. And so you hear a lot of economists using words like personal income tax, corporate income tax, capital gains tax, profit tax, estate tax, all these different things. That's income. That's basically saying to someone, I don't care what you do with your money. I'm not going to get it when you spend it. I'm going to take a cut of it when you get it. Or you can tax consumption. You can tax what a person eats, drinks, and consumes. And if you think about this, the average person, it doesn't matter what rate you put on their tax if you're taxing consumption, The average person in this country spends everything they make. And so whatever rate you put on it, if you build a fiscal system on consumption tax, you're taxing what they make at 100%. Not the rate, but everything they use, everything they spend. It's being taxed. This is what we've done for 40-something years. And if you look at our national debt, I've made this statement before. I've made this statement, by the way, the comment I'm making now, I made on June's communication before the elections. This should not be any surprise to anyone. And so you can have the value-added tax, or you could have as a consumption tax, or you could have an income tax. And they affect the country very differently. And so the question that we face today, unfortunately, is not whether we should tax, You can sit down and take whatever political color you wish, but at the end of the day, if you look over just the last, from 1992 to now, every government has run a deficit. In fact, from independence to now, except 1 year, I believe, every government has run a deficit. And the deficit is really the difference between what the government spends and what the government earns through taxation. Just like running a checkbook in overdraft all the time. And so we've run such a massive deficit over the few years that we've been independent that we're now at the point where we have to pay. We're now at the point where 21% of everything we make as a government is spent just on interest. That means every dollar the government makes, 21 cents. Goes just to pay back interest. That's where we are. And we cannot stay here. We cannot hide from this. We're at the point where our national debt stands at 58% of our GDP, meaning it's an imaginary figure. You take everything that everyone in the country earns. That's not the government's money. But just take it all together and add it all up. That's the gross domestic product, GDP. And so it becomes a benchmark against which you measure government borrowing. Because you say, well, the country is this active, so the government should only have this much debt. The kind of red line mark of where you start to panic is 60% of GDP. We're at 58% of GDP, and that's before the June budget that's about to come up. So it's time to get serious. And I commend the PLP for being serious about this. I also want to especially commend the Honourable Member for Centerville and the Honourable Member for Golden Isles for containing expenditure over the period that we've been in the government. But again, the question is not whether we need to tax. The question is, who do we tax? That's the only question. Not whether we tax, who? Who pays? Yes. Not whether they pay. Someone has to pay. Yes. One way or the other, we don't tax, we will pay as a country. Yes. We will pay because IMF and Moody's and Standard & Poor's and the others will keep downgrading our currency, and sooner or later, two things are going to happen. It's going to become so expensive for us to borrow money that we'll have a downward spiral, and we'll have pressure on our dollar and on our reserves, and we'll have to devalue. This is, again, I've been saying this for a while. And so we have to be serious about it. We cannot do this drunken spending spree that the last party did. We have to be serious about it. We have to curtail expenditures as we're doing, and we have to figure out who we tax. And that's the only question. Let's look at the figures a little bit. Between 1993 and 2013, it's just a little window, but it gives you a better understanding. It's only 20 years of where we are. Our revenue in 1993 was $617 million. 2013, 1.4 billion. So we basically doubled the revenue in 20 years. Our deficit, 93, 11 million. 2013, 508 million. That's the difference between what we earn and what we spend as a government. That went up by about 50 times, 50. Our national debt, 1.14 billion in 93, and 5 in 2013, 4 times. Revenue only went up by twice the figure. But everything went up disproportionately. So the question again is not whether we tax, but whom we tax. There was a time when we used to say that we couldn't tax income because it would scare away all the businesses. There was a time that was true. That was a very responsible view to take once upon a time. That was a view we took at independence. That's not the view now. The world has totally changed. There's a group called the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's basically the G8 countries, the biggest countries in the world. They put together something called the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. They came out with this concept called unfair tax competition, last 15, 20 years. And basically their position was very simple. If you are not taxing, there has to be something wrong with your jurisdiction. You have to be a rogue jurisdiction. You're attracting illicit funds. That's what you're doing. This is decades ago now, a decade and a half ago roughly. And so the world changed. Countries, including the Bahamas, had to change with it. We started signing on to double taxation treaties. We started signing on to exchange of information, TIEA, Tax Exchange Information Act. We started to do a lot of things. And we basically got rid of this pure concept, or some would say this unfair concept of bank secrecy. It's still there in a sense, but it's not there in the extreme sense it used to be. And so there is no real advantage these days to saying you don't tax. In fact, I've had clients leave the Bahamas because we wouldn't tax them. Because in their home jurisdictions, they're treated with great scrutiny because they're not taxed here. And then over the last 3 years, roughly, the U.S. took the matter to a totally different level. They passed something called FATCA, the Foreign Account Taxation Compliance Act. And what they're basically saying is, listen, we don't care where you are, Americans. Wherever you go, anyone who touches your money is now an agent of the U.S. And if they don't tell us you have their money, we're not only coming after your money, but we're coming after them. And we're going to fine them for not telling us. It's a totally different world. Saying you don't tax doesn't benefit anyone. Well, I'll get back to that. But it certainly doesn't benefit the companies that are doing business here. So the question arises, why don't we do it? We have banks and large companies in our own country declaring dividends in the newspapers all over the place and not paying a penny on it. Many of those banks are foreign banks, and when they go home, they pay tax on the funds they took from here. And had we taxed them, it wouldn't make any difference to them, because when they go home with the money, they'd get a discount for what they paid us. And so the net difference, the bottom line is, it is as if we tax the foreign banks, and then we go to their home countries and say, let us write you a check for what we just finished taxing them. That's what we're essentially doing by not taxing them. Because it makes no difference to them. None. So the real question is, why don't we do it?
Really like that idea, Montague.
VAT is said to be a regional and international answer to taxation. And I'm just laying it out as straight as I can. Like it, don't like it, you know, is what it is. And I hope people are watching that side walk out, because I hope that puts a huge exclamation mark on what I'm saying. They do not mind this tax. They like this tax. Because when you put this tax in place, you don't have to put the income tax on businesses in place. You don't have to tax their constituents if you tax ours. And by that I don't mean PLP and F&M, you know. I mean small people, poor people, working class people, middle class people. If you tax them, just continue doing what we're doing for 41 years. And you do not have to tax the businesses. Anyway, back to this point. It's been said in this House a couple times that VAT is in 140 countries out there. And we just 137, 140. And we ought to just follow that example. Because everyone else accepts it, why not us? It's not quite true. And I want to spend some time on why that is not the full story. Look at, for instance, Australia. Australia calls their tax a general sales tax, very much like VAT. And they do tax at 10%, which is less than we're proposing. But what you have to include in that discussion is Australia also taxes corporate tax at 30%. It also taxes payroll tax. In other words, the general sales tax is not the way they fund their government. It's a small component of it. Austria, 20% VAT, but 25% corporate tax, 50% maximum individual corporate income tax. And the list goes on and on. They have a 17.5% VAT, but they have a 25% corporate tax and a 25% minimum going up to 35% individual income tax. It's a different mix. And no one is saying anyone should get away from being taxed. We're saying I am saying the tax burden should be spread equitably. And we cannot continue to build our country on the back of the poor, the working class, and the middle class, because we will tax them out of existence. What is going to happen, and I'm going to go on with this list, but what is going to happen if we pass this and the informal, like they like to call it in some countries, sector grows, otherwise known as the black market? Do you think people are going to sit back and simply pay? Do you think what this woman is doing now in 8 Mile Rock and oh, you all are nothing from Freeport, eh? We have so many communities where people are running an informal sector. And it used to be an informal sector for the immigrant population. But everyone goes there now. I wouldn't say everyone, but more and more people. The harder it gets in the food store, the more you run to the other sector. This is not something that you need to guess about. Just look at Jamaica. Once you tax to a level which is beyond burdensome, the people will find an alternative. Brazil, 17% VAT, but 34% income tax. Corporate tax, 27% income. Canada, yes, they have a 5% GST, but 11 to 15% corporate tax. And up to 54% individual income tax. That's how they fund their government. Even Cuba, yes, they have a 2.5 to 20% VAT sales tax, but 30% corporate tax, 10% to 50% income tax, individual. The money comes, and this is what IMF means by broadening the tax base, you know. This is what Standard & Poor's and Moody means. It doesn't mean tax the people as much as you can. What it means is diversify your taxation. Diversify where the money is coming from, so that if there is a shock, a systemic shock to one part of the economy, a fiscal shock, the government doesn't go without money. There's money coming from another section. It's like saying if you're selling goods, don't sell one type of good. Sell a couple. So if people don't buy that, they'll buy this. But our fiscal system is built on one. About 80% of our revenue comes from the back of the poor, the middle class, the working class. That cannot be right. I'll get to alternatives at the end of this remark, but I want to spend time on saying this because I want this to hit home. You go into Germany, yeah, you have a VAT, 19%, 7% on food, but you also have the corporate tax at 29.8%. You have the individual tax at 0 to 45%. Guyana, same thing. Iceland, Hong Kong, all these places, same thing. Go into Jamaica, 17.5% VAT. Yeah, but you have a 33.3% corporate tax and up to a 25% income tax, individual. They say the same thing about Ireland, which is an interesting example because they point the direction to how we should do our mix with VAT. But let's look at New Zealand. Yes, there's a 15% VAT, GST, whatever you want to call it. 28% corporate tax. 15 to 33% income tax. It's a mix. It's not running the government on the back of the poor.
Combination.
Look at the United Kingdom. 20% VAT, the 20 to 24% corporate tax, 45%, 0 to 45% individual income tax. United States, very similar. And so it makes a point, a very simple point. Don't compare apples and oranges. Don't just say everyone else has VAT. That's just a small component of what they have. They have it as a part of a mixed bag, so that you do not have the same people carrying the bulk of the finances for the country. It cannot be right. You know, let me just say this, Mr. Speaker, because this is what really, I think, is the absolute bottom line. We're not switching or proposing that we switch custom duties for VAT just to have some window dressing, you know. We're not saying we're going to switch it just in order to have a different name for the tax or a different way of collecting it. We're saying we're going to switch it to increase the amount of revenue, $200 to $300 million. And so when you see that switch, but it's still a consumption tax, meaning the same poor, working class, and middle class are paying it, we're talking about a tax increase on them. That's what we're talking about. How can we look at Hubert Ingram in 2009 and 2010, the way that we decried the tax increases he did, and up to when we came to office in 2012, and then our solution is, you know what, we're going to add another $200 to $300 million on top of that and redefine it. How? I mean, how could that possibly make sense? It's still a consumption tax, and therefore it's still wrong. Makes no sense just to redefine it. We need to address our fiscal house. We need to put our fiscal house, have a taxation, and this is why I went to the way I started. Bold ideas. National insurance was a bold idea. A PLP idea. Education, health, housing, all of those. These are our ideas. We're the only ones who will do this. I've said this before. We're the only ones who will do this. These guys who walked out will never do this. But we are going to add insult to injury by redefining this, entrenching this, pushing our people further down. How? I expected to be on the other side of this debate, you know. I expected these guys one of these days to come with this value-added tax so I could tell them historically who we are and why that will never happen and show them up. But instead, we come with it. Let me just say this. And let me say this as openly as I can. Let me say this as openly as I can. You know how Bahamians are? You wait until you go, and we all know this is going to happen. Bahamians, if we enact this, will go into the food store, restaurant, lawyer, doctor, wherever you go, and talk about whatever exemptions you want, because all exemptions are time sensitive. Sooner or later, they're not going to be there anymore. I don't look at how it starts. I look at how it's going to finish. At the end of the day, Bahamians are going to take their receipt and say, oh, this thing costs $200, but I pay in $230. They're going to forget it used to be customs duty, you know. They're going to say, who cost me to pay this extra $30? Vote them out. That's how they're going to do, you know. That is going to be the response. No one's going to sit down and do some empirical analysis. Oh, this used to be added in, and we took this out, we did this, and now this is what we're doing. No one. People are just going to get that little receipt and say, VAT means PLP. Vote them out. That's how simple it is. That's as simple as it is. Mr. Speaker, let me say a few things more. Let me just say a few things more about VAT. And this is what I think is egregious about VAT. Absolutely egregious about it. Everything I've just said about it being a consumption tax, and that is not who we are, and that will hurt our people, that's bad enough. But picture the kind of consumption tax it is. I'm gonna borrow a couple phones here, just so I could. Let me borrow your phone too, just so I could show something. This is the wholesale company. This is the retail company. This is the consumer. This is VAT. This guy will import good. Let's say it costs $10. He'll import it. He will do some stuff with it because he has to put it on the shelf and he has to pay his accountant, he has to pay his... That's a value he adds to it. He will stock it on his shelf. When he imports it, he'll pay his 15%. Government gets that. 15% is done. When he sells it here, he will add in all his costs. He will add in all his profits. He'll add in everything to that. And this guy, the retailer, will buy it from him and pay his 15%. But this retailer, first, this guy, the wholesaler, he got his tax back because he put it in this price for the retailer. It's back. The retailer, when he buys it, will get a credit for what this guy paid. So although he's being taxed at 15%, he's not really paying 15. It's 15 on what he just bought, including this man's markup, less what this man paid. So he now has it. So it's far more expensive. He sells it here. He builds all that VAT and profit into this, and the consumer pays it. So he got his tax back. The consumer holds the tax and no one gives him anything back. And the bottom line is the wholesaler's tax and his tax on his profits, the retailer's tax and his tax on his profits, all get borne by the consumer. What kind of tax is that? That makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense.
So that's the reason why the corporate structure if they ain't feel it.
We will stand or fall, and I've heard this statement made in this House a couple of times. We will stand or fall on VAT. And with the greatest respect, that's missing the point. That's absolutely missing the point. You're talking about 3 years from now. I'm talking about tomorrow. I'm talking about day after July. I'm talking about my constituents and my fellow Bahamians. I'm not talking about standing or falling politically. I'm talking about suffering immediately. Immediately. And to say, well, you know, I'm willing to stand or fall on VAT, misses, with the greatest respect, the point of why we're here. Because they're going to suffer, not us. We just go home. They're going to suffer immediately. It misses the point that this country cannot afford to let these guys get back in. We are willing to stand or fall? Really? We're willing to let them back in to do the damage they're going to do again? Really? We are at a very crucial point fiscally. The kind of management that the Honourable Member for, Right Honourable Member for Centreville and the Member for Golden Isle has brought to the government's finances, we haven't seen that in... Please. When have we seen that before? Are we willing to take the chance of losing that? An option for us. And it ignores the fact that we don't need to do this. It's not as if we're saying we need to do this, and you know, we're here to take licks, so if you give us a lick fine, we don't need to. There are alternatives. And so that brings us to the discussion on what are the alternatives. Alternative is obviously to tax wealth and income rather than consumption. And that's not wrong, you know. That's saying to the guys, you know, that tax break we gave you all for 40 years? Over. Keep what you kept. What we gave you, we ran up a national debt because we weren't willing to tax you. You're good. But we can tax you starting tomorrow. And this is not new. You look at Ireland. You look at Hong Kong. You look at Singapore. You look at jurisdictions with a tax rate of about 17%. They are attracting business based on their tax rate, not running it, because they are competing with other countries to tax. People want certainty. No one is afraid of taxes. Not unless you're some funny drug cartel or something. But the business community is not afraid of the taxes, because they're going to pay it anyway. All they'll ask us is, do you have a double taxation treaty with my home country? Do you have it? Yes, you do. I could do business with you. And I say this. If we are terrified of taxing the people with money, why are we so willing to tax the poor? Why are we not terrified of that? Because they don't have the voices that the rich people have? Because they cannot put together organizations? You know, I remember, Mr. Speaker, and I remember this. I will never forget this. I was not in this house, but I was on the campaign trail. And I remember Hubert Ingram bringing the BTC sale to this house. And I remember the people knowing that it was wrong, marching in the streets. I remember him lining up barricades around here and dogs. And I remember him then saying to his members, if you vote against this, I'm going to call election, which could only be a threat. I mean, no point in saying to someone, if you do this, I'm going to give you a bonus. What you mean is, if you do this, I'm going to hurt you. And what he was saying to them is, and you know we will lose. And they lost. That's not the point I'm making. They did. But the point I'm making is that he threatened them into voting for something they knew was wrong. The country knew was wrong, and we're paying for it still. We saw that as wrong. We saw it as uncourageous. Where's our courage? How is that different than this debate? And I tell you this, and I mean this. I know this to be politically true. I'm on the ground. I don't know what the rest of you all do. I'm on the ground. Pass this and we lose the next election. Period. Period. I mean, it's as simple as that, you know. There's no need to scare people. There's no need to scare people about some different scenario under VAT and under income tax. There's no need for it. The simple thing we do as a country is what every country do. If we pass an income tax, and that is a PLP initiative, if we pass that, and we simply say, the first 75,000, it doesn't apply to you. It will not apply to most people in this country. If you just pass it and say that, it will not apply to most people in this country. But the top 2 to 3% who own everything, it will apply to them. Just find the right formula. But we need a formula that works. But this formula, we will punish our own people. Why? Why would we do that? That's how it sounded. Let me finish my presentation. Let me also say that implementation of a proper income-based tax is not a difficult proposition for this country. We have the regulatory framework in place already. We call it NIB. It's there. We track everyone already. Just some parameters need to be changed, but it's there. But what we're talking about so far is not equity. What we're talking about is when, not whom, when. And with the greatest respect, that's a wrong discussion. There's another reason I advance and support the idea of income tax, Mr. Speaker. There's a story well, it's not a story, it's a historical account in the United States of a gangster who was called Al Capone. Al Capone was a gangster. Everyone knew he was a gangster. No one could prove he was a gangster. He was a very good gangster. They didn't put Al Capone in jail for being a gangster, you know. They put Al Capone in jail for tax evasion. And the reason this is important to me is because there is no way that we are ever going to get control of the fiscal affairs of this country unless we deal with corruption in this country. People don't want to talk about it. Fine, don't talk about it. But it's true. It is true. You know, we have so many people. You don't even have to call names. Everyone has a friend or someone they know, a neighbor, in customs making a couple of dollars and own 10 apartments. Come into politics with no money, and in a couple of years, they own everything. I mean, we must know what's going on. And the good thing about an income-based tax system is we're not saying to you, tell us you know. We're saying, if you don't tell us, and we find out, we're going to put you in jail just for not telling us where that you got this money. And if you told us you got it, you lied about where you got it, we'll put you in jail for not telling us the source of your funds. When these ideas are glaring, They are essential for us to build this democracy. Are we willing? Are we going to be the government, the party, that puts a massive tax increase on the poor, working class and middle class, or will we be the party that goes and rationalizes our fiscal system and at the same time tackles corruption? I mean, I'm tired of seeing policemen all over the place, driving these things I don't think they can afford. I might be wrong, I might have won the lottery. But, why do we tolerate it? And so to the alternatives, Mr. Speaker, and this is, I only have one thing to say after this, and that's to not forget my home base of Grand Bahama, and so I'm going to finish this and then I'm going to pay a little attention to that. This is what I suggest. For whatever it's worth, and I speak it into the Hansard of this House for posterity, we're talking about $200 to $300 million. We need to legalize gaming, period. And let me restate what I've said in this House before. A referendum in which we tell the people beforehand that they're not to be concerned because it's non-binding. One. Two, in respect of which slightly under half of the people vote, because we told them, don't worry about it, it's non-binding. And three, in respect of which only half of that half vote against the referendum. Has no moral persuasion whatsoever to me, period. You're talking about a quarter of the population, at best, saying no, half of a half. We are here to legislate. And we ought not to be timid about legislating. And we certainly shouldn't be timid about legislating to remove discrimination against Bahamians. That should be the easiest piece of legislation to pass. And only involves removing a couple words from the Lottery and Gaming Act. And that's done. The benefit of that is that we move away from this conundrum in which we put the police. Where we oversaw a referendum in which the number houses openly displayed themselves and marched all over Bay Street and everywhere else, bought T-shirts and put ad in the papers and did all sorts of stuff. And now we're pretending they don't exist. And the police is timid about dealing with it. We cannot give, this is like raising children. You cannot give these mixed messages. Right is right, wrong is wrong. We cannot criminalize an entire sector of our economy because it's Bahamian, while at the same time embracing that same sector when it's run by foreign nationals. It makes no sense. None. And if we're serious, and if the church is serious about saying that they believe gambling is a sin, I'm going to say something else on that in a second, then let them come and protest the casinos. Let them say, close it down. Let them go in church on Sunday and say, all of our members, I'm telling you right now, anyone who works any way connected with casinos, we don't want any more tithes and offerings from you. Period. Say that. For the hypocrisy of it and the willingness 40 years after independence to discriminate against, it's a laughingstock that we are willing to do this to our own people. I don't understand it. If you legalize gaming, they say that we're going to get about 40 million from it. Others say it's closer to 80 million. Legalize it. Legalize it. Income tax. If you look at our GDP of 8 billion, roughly, if you assume only 10% of that goes to the rich, and you tax just that at 15%, talking about 130 million. Bring it. Do not extend, and I've said this before, we're going to have another debate on this, I'm sure, at some point, but do not extend the real property tax exemption in Grand Bahama, in this port area. Don't extend it. It doesn't benefit Bahamians, it only benefits non-Bahamians. Now, I'll say it as openly as I can, there's another provision in the Hawkesbury Creek Agreement which says you cannot tax real property in Freeport anyway, unless you tax it in the entire Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So let the formal exemption expire, and the non-discriminatory provision will kick in. Next year. on $50 billion of real property assets, and not $55 billion of real property assets in Freeport, which is a conservative estimate, at a 1% tax, that's $50 million a year. All I ask is you leave us with half. Give Minister for Grand Bahama a budget he could work with. Let's start to move to the point where we realize that some income from the out islands have to stay in those islands. Let us be the government that starts that. Collect the outstanding real property tax. Collect it. And don't just say you're hoping to get it. Pass a law. Create an agency that bypasses the courts, like the IRS. If you do not pay your real property tax, we put a lien on your house, and if you still don't pay it, we sell it. That's a government tax. It's a government tax. Why should we have to go through a court to do that? Just pass a law. Give a proper amnesty period. Say to everyone, listen, you owe us $500 million. You got a break. We give you half off. Pay us in 6 months. Or we come in to take your house and sell it. That'll get not just their attention, but the bank's attention, you know. We'll collect our money. Put some teeth in the law. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say what I've been saying from I came in this House in the first few months. Reduce the prime rate. Reduce it. It is a monetary tool. Central bank. No, the central bank operates under the Central Bank Act. We passed the Central Bank Act. And my point is very simple. It's a monetary tool. And I don't want to confuse people. There's a difference between fiscal and monetary. Fiscal means the money the government gets and how they spend it. Monetary means how do you control the system of money in your country? How do you make it go up and down? How do you induce an inflation or induce a recession or stagnate the economy? How do you do it? A huge component of our national debt is denominated in Bahamian dollars, tied to the prime. It's not just good for consumers, it's good for the government. And then we are in this conflicted position where we are one of the biggest borrowers from one of our commercial banks. We have to, you know, it perverts the system. It gets to the point where the people we are regulating are the very people who have us by the family jewels, you know? And that cannot be allowed to continue. It also is at the point where we are unable to bring relief to our own people on mortgage debts and credit card debts and access to finance and to be able to capitalize and expand their company. The very things that we're talking about in getting the economy working are dependent on the interest rate. And for those who don't understand, the prime rate, really they call it the discount rate. It's a central bank set rate, and it's a fiction. The central bank is basically saying, if you have to borrow money from us, we're going to lend it to you. I think it's 4.25% or something like that. I forget what it is right now, but it's somewhere up in that area. 4.75. I thought it was 2.5. Go ahead. Anyway, let's say it's 4.25. And it's a fiction. The central bank says to the commercial banks, if you get tight on money and you want to borrow money from us, this is what we're going to lend it to you at. And that becomes the basis of the prime rate, because the commercial banks then add what they call 50 basis point, 0.5% to that rate to get the prime rate. And then they say to you when you come to borrow from them, we're going to lend you at so many percent above prime. So many percent above prime. Now the fiction here is this. You believe that the bank is only making that 0.5% above prime, above the discount rate to get to prime, and say that other 2%, if you're a great customer, maybe 4% if you're not so great, as their profit. But that assumes they're borrowing from the central bank, which they're not, because they're borrowing from the consumers. You go to the bank, you put your money on fixed deposit, they give you 1%, they're borrowing that money from you and lending it back out at 8-9%. And so the prime, I prefer to say prime because that's what most people know as when they go in the bank. But the discount rate plus the 0.5%, 50 basis point to get to the prime is a margin that's built into their profit so long as they don't borrow from the central bank. And most of them don't. They don't have to. And so why are we allowing the economy to remain inflated in this way? Why are we not bringing relief to our people? Why are we not slashing people's mortgages simply by doing whatever we have to, either by persuasion or otherwise, to reduce the prime? and their credit cards, and their access to financing and so on. Why? It's the same old colonial argument that we cannot be trusted to govern ourselves. That if you reduce the prime, there's going to be too much liquidity, everyone's going to be happy, they're going on a spending spree. Same old argument. I mean, is that how we legislate in here? By assuming that our people are incapable of managing themselves? Speaker, I think the mere fact that a part of the proposal on VAT is that we will increase funding to social services for those people who will be severely impacted by VAT is an admission that we know we're going to push more people into poverty. How can we legislate on the basis that we know we're going to push more people into poverty? That cannot be right. That simply cannot be right. You know, I went to school in Jamaica. I did my law degree in Barbados, University of the West Indies, and I did 2 years in Jamaica, Norman Manley Law School. And I got there when the Jamaican dollar, I think, was 5.97 to 1. And while I was there, I saw it slip and slip and slip and slip and slip. To the point where, and your salary doesn't go up as the dollar slips. To the point where the average person had a problem buying a chicken in the food store.
Matter of fact, it's a little topic.
A chicken in the food store.
Chicken bar.
They were at the point where they were being dictated to by the IMF. We're at the point where we can see the cliff, but we still can turn around. We still can turn around. And for us to march over that cliff, I will say this, and I'll say it as resoundingly as I can, is not only unpatriotic, it's un-PLP. We should not march over that cliff. This proposal should be a stench in the nostril of our party. This is not who we are. We uplift people, we do not push them down. This is an affront to our history and our philosophy. We should not enact this. This is theirs. This is their brainchild. We should not enact this. This would be a betrayal of our people, and it's something we should never contemplate. I have about 4 minutes left, Mr. Speaker, and I'm now going to move to Grand Bahama. And so clearly I've made my point. I will not support it. I think that it is reprehensibly wrong, not just for this country, but for this party, and I will not support it. Turning attention to Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker. I mean, there's I don't want to use all the time on this, but there's an interesting interplay that will happen in Grand Bahama also. If you impose VAT, because it will not be imposed in the port area on licensees, meaning you will even more devastate the surrounding areas outside of the port area. You will create a greater disparity between businesses in the port area and businesses outside. But anyway, there are those who should look at that. Back to my people in Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask as openly as possible, 21 months after we've been in office, please open East-West Sunrise Highway. We promised to do it in our Charter for Governance. It is crucial to us. It's not just an esoteric consideration to us, you know. It is because the Port Authority closed it. They closed the link between East-West Sunrise Highway by building a saltwater pool for the Royal Oasis. It is the lifeblood of our island. It is a direct link between the harbor and the city. It's the heart of the city. It's right at the Ranfurly Circus. It is what the closure of that has led to the demise of the International Bazaar. And incidentally, to the prosperity of Port Lucaya, which is owned by Bourbon Street, which is owned by the Grand Bahama Port Authority. I'll just lay out the pieces, draw the conclusions. But whether say they know that they would be benefiting their business by closing East-West Sunrise Highway and hurting the owners in the port, in the bazaar, whether you say that, or you say, oh, coincidentally, they benefited their business and killed the bazaar and didn't stop to reverse it when they realized what they did, whatever conclusion you come to, the fact of the matter is it's still closed. Today, it needs to be open. I'll just say two more things. While I'm here, I have to speak for my constituency also. Mr. Speaker, I strongly encourage the recapitalization of the Hotel Corporation. Strongly encourage it for Grand Bahama. There's a hotel sitting there called the Freeport Inn, which has now been vandalized, but it's still structurally sound. There's the Royal Oasis. There's opportunity. Our people in Grand Bahama, when we sit in this house and we talk about $20 million for a farm in Andros or $12 million for this, and it's like pennies. $20 million in Freeport is a gold mine. Absolute gold mine. Recapitalize the corporation, please. Put our people to work rebuilding those hotels. Rent them out for little or nothing so that we have economic activity in the heart of our island. And so people are no longer left in this state of dejectedness, almost hopelessness that they're in now. I just want to say one quick word, and, you know, like I say, I speak to represent a lot of voices when I'm here. We accuse the FNM before elections of using government funds to influence a national election through an agency of the FNM. I just put it at this level for now. There are government agencies in Freeport which are positioning themselves to influence local government elections. And I will not allow that in Marco City. And so I strongly suggest that pulls back quickly, because otherwise I will respond to that. Speaker, my final comment is I am happy to see the discipline, as I've said before, that is being brought to finances. I'm out of time, Mr. Speaker. I will continue my contributions at another time. But I thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Speaker.